right, welcome to FACT's webinar called Federal Funding and Financing for Farmers. It's presented by Ferd Hefner, the Senior Strategic Advisor with the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, or NSAC, and it's hosted by Food Animal Concerns Trust. I am Larissa McKenna, FACT's Humane Farming Program Director and the Director of FACT's Fund a Farmer Project. I will be moderating the webinar this afternoon. Thank you all very much for joining us. It is certainly a pleasure to have you here. So Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT, we are a national nonprofit organization. We're headquartered in Chicago. We work nationally, and we promote the safe and humane production of meat, milk, and eggs. I direct FACT's Fund a Farmer project, which awards grants and facilitates peer-to-peer farmer education to increase the number of animals that are raised humanely in our country. And this webinar is part of our Humane Farming webinar series. And at this time, I am delighted to introduce our esteemed presenter, Ferd Hefner, as I said, the Senior Strategic Advisor at the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, NSAC. Ferd is a founding member of NSAC and has been a leader in the sustainable agriculture community for over 30 years. Today, he will discuss the many programs that are offered by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, that will help farmers like you succeed. So it's certainly a tremendous honor to have Ferd with us today, and he will be available to answer your questions later on in the webinar. So at this point, I'm going to hand the virtual mic over to Ferd so that he may start his presentation. And with that, Ferd, please take it away.
Great. Well, thank you, Larissa, and a big thank you to FACT for putting this webinar on. I'm really delighted to be with all of you virtually, and already my clicker is not moving. You want to just forward it for me, Larissa? So I'm going to present on a variety of USDA programs that might be of interest. I'm not going to try to cover everything, but I will give some examples and happy to answer questions about other things. I want to move forward another slide. Let me just give you a little background. Hopefully many of you know about NSAC, but I'll just give you the thumbnail. We are a nationwide coalition made up of 120 member organizations, sustainable farm and food groups around the country, and have been in existence since the late 1980s, and have an office in Washington, D.C., where we do advocate directly with Congress and the administration on issues that are determined by our member groups and our farmer stakeholders as to what they want us to be doing here in D.C. With Congress and the federal agencies. And we cover not every conceivable issue that might be of interest, but we do cover a lot: conservation, ag research and extension, farm programs, beginning farmer programs, marketing, rural development, rural business development programs, and food safety. Those sort of define our major categories of our work. And we do rely quite a bit on our farmer constituency, both in terms of farmer fly-ins to D.C. to talk directly with policymakers, and district meetings in congressional districts and states to meet with members of Congress, and of course in helping us to form our policy and our priorities from year to year. So that's sort of NSAC in a nutshell, and I was the former policy director of the organization, but have now transitioned after 30 years in that role to be a senior advisor. So moving on to the next slide, what I want to do in this is to sort of preview a guide that we put out just recently, earlier this year, called Growing Opportunity, a guide to USDA sustainable farming programs. But I also want to call attention to another guide that both of these are on our website, which is sustainableagriculture.net. The other one's called Grassroots Guide to Federal Farm and Food Programs. This guide that I'm going to walk through today is really oriented to farmers, so it's only talking about direct farmer programs. The other guide, the grassroots guide as we call it, includes a broader array of USDA programs, not just ones that are directly for farmers. So that's the main difference between the two. We wrote and published this new guide, Growing Opportunity, through a cooperative agreement with Farm Service Agency at USDA, who asked us to come up with this guide, which is now in all the county and regional offices for the Farm Service Agency. So hopefully as farmers go there to sign up for whatever they might be signing up for, they might see the guide and get interested in some other programs. So that's sort of the basic gist of why we did that. So next slide will show you how we organized this particular guide. We did it around 5 major areas: conservation, marketing, risk management, crop insurance, operating and infrastructure loans, and then real estate loans. So those were our broad categories, obviously not covering everything, but we had to be somewhat selective to make it fit in a short guidebook that would be relevant to people walking into their local FSA office. So that's how we organized it. And the next slide will show you how we tried to help people walk through the guide. So there are these little prompts for each of the issue areas that then can lead you to the appropriate pages that are relevant to what you want to do. So these are examples. So for instance, in conservation, soil health or water conservation or wildlife habitat, and in this particular case, the 3 green arrows mean that the program that I will use as an example addresses all 3 of those. And some of the examples as we walk through the webinar, I'll only be dealing with one of the 3, but in this case, it will be all 3. So the next slide really presents what I will present as the example in this conservation area, of which there are many possible programs to choose, but I'm going to do the Conservation Stewardship Program, which is now has over 80 million acres enrolled in it nationwide, which makes it both the largest conservation program overall and definitely the largest working lands conservation program. So Conservation Stewardship, or CSP, is a working lands, working farm, or ranch program, not a conservation land retirement program like the Conservation Reserve Program. It covers a very wide range of resource concerns and types of practices, including cover cropping and resource-conserving crop rotations, managed intensive grazing, IPM, conservation tillage, and on and on. The real focus is on management activities, not on conservation structures. For structures, you would be better off going to the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, or EQIP. So it's run by the Natural Resources Conservation Service. It provides, as all the Farm Bill conservation programs do, both financial and technical assistance. In the case of CSP, it is a whole farm program, so you actually enroll the entire operation, not just a particular field or a particular area of the farm that you want to do something, some conservation activity, but rather the whole thing. So it's a comprehensive approach. It deals with all the priority resource concerns in your given area. It is unique amongst the Farm Bill conservation programs in that you get support for 2 different categories. Category 1, your active annual management of ongoing conservation activities. And then Category 2 is new conservation enhancements that you enroll in through CSP. An enhancement is basically a conservation practice taken to the next level. So NRCS has many, many conservation practices, all of which you can use in CSP as you can in the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. But CSP is unique in that it has enhancements that go above and beyond just the basic practice. And then some of those enhancements get bundled, as NRCS calls them, into suites of practices that you can choose either the individual enhancements or you can choose the suite of practices or the bundle And the bundle has well, several advantages. One, they sort of make sense together. So there's a soil health bundle or a wildlife bundle or a pollinator bundle, et cetera, that help address a particular resource concern. The other nice thing about the bundles is that the payment rate is slightly higher than if you chose the individual enhancements that make them up. So the payment situation in CSP, there's payment for the ongoing active management of conservation activities that on national average, that's about 40% of the payment stream. Then there's the payment for the new enhancements or bundles. That's on national average about 60% of the payment stream. There's also one particular separate payment called the supplemental payment that's just for resource conserving crop rotations. And by the way, if there are grazers or livestock folks on the call, we're hoping in the next farm bill that Congress will also make a supplemental payment for management-intensive rotational grazing. And then another somewhat unique thing about CSP is that it's a 5-year contract that you can renew, and upon renewal, you also have to demonstrate that you will have continual improvement by addressing other priority resource concerns that maybe you didn't address the first time, or by adding additional enhancements. So that's sort of CSP in a nutshell, a good example of a conservation program that can really do a lot for sustainable farming, and is a really important option. 10 million acres of new enrollments get made each year on an annual basis, and then because it's a 5-year program that can be renewed, it obviously is additive after that point. So we are currently just a little bit north of 80 million acres nationwide. So next slide is I'll just give a quick story on some of these to sort of make it a little bit more personal. So this is, on our website, I should mention, on the NSAC website, we have a blog series that often will demonstrate the impact of a program by telling somebody's story. So this is a recent one we did on a CSP farmer from Alabama, happens to be a beginning farmer, and worked as a beginning farmer with NRCS on his CSP contract back in 2013. And the highlight probably of his CSP work has been to turn his farm into a rotational grazing operation. In addition to the rotational grazing, also did some work on cover cropping and manure management. So that has proven very successful in his particular case, and he has been named the Alabama NRCS Conservation Farmer of the Year, which is excellent, and has also done quite a bit of farm demonstration project days using his farm as a sort of model site for grazing clinics that Auburn and Alabama Extension Service has put on, using his farm as a model. So just a really nice story of how, in this particular case, CSP aided a beginning farmer in getting established and getting established in a way that's really good for the land. So next slide, we'll just move through different areas. So that was the quick and dirty on conservation. Let's look at some of the marketing programs. So again, each in the guide, each one of these has a couple of examples of what somebody might be looking for when they pick up the guide, and then it then has a prompt that directs you to the page of the guide or the pages of the guide that might be relevant. So in this case, we'll look at two different ones, one related to value-added production and one related to food safety. So next slide, we'll go straightway into value-added. The Value-Added Producer Grant Program is one that the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition has championed since it was legislated back in the year 2000, and it became operational at USDA in 2001. So it's been around quite a bit, and it's the only program at USDA Rural Development that is specifically for farmers and for farm businesses. Most rural development business programs are for rural businesses much more broadly, but this one is really focused on farmers, which is great. It's a competitive program, competitive grant program, so there's an annual request for proposals. We try as hard as we can to convince USDA to put that request for proposals out in December each year so that farmers can work on proposals during the winter months. We sadly have not succeeded in that very many years, and it often comes out in the spring. And in fact, this year, because of the change in administration, it's still not even out now. Which is unfortunate because it's much harder to get people to think about putting proposals together when they're busy farming. But at any rate, we will continue our advocacy of them coming out with it in November or December, which is much better timing. So it covers a broad range of value-added enterprises. It can be anything from processing to product differentiation to local food marketing, even farmer participation in a broader supply chain or value chain business or supply chain. I can't think of a better word for it than that. Like a food hub, for instance, and it would be an example of a kind of mid-tier value chain. So it covers a pretty wide range of things. There's two different kinds of grants. There's planning grants that do exactly what they sound like. There's smaller grants to help farmers and farm businesses and co-ops to plan a value-added business, and then there's the actual working capital grants, which are larger and can actually be used for the actual development of the project. I should note that you can't use value-added producer grants for buildings or building renovations. It's not bricks and mortar, but can be just about anything else. There's a lot more to it. I'm not going to try to cover all the nitty-gritty, but I will mention that there's a priority in the program for small and mid-scale family farms and also for beginning farmers and what USDA calls socially disadvantaged farmers or minority farmers for using a different terminology. In the ranking system, because it's competitive in the ranking system, if you fit into one of those categories or if the business that's being planned will particularly aid one of those categories, you get extra ranking points. So that can be advantageous if you're in one of those categories. It is highly competitive. Most years, it depends on how much funding is available from Congress in any given year. On average, historically, $20 million has been available each year for grants. The most recent cycle last year was bigger than that. There's been a few years when it's been smaller than that, but that's about what it averages each year. So a lot more could be said about that, but I guess in a nutshell, it's the sort of entrepreneurial agriculture program at USDA, and one that we hope to see grow over time. So next slide, again, is going to be an example. In this particular example, again, another blog post that you can find on our website for more detail, but Clay and Valerie Oliver are in Georgia and part of a multi-generational centennial farm that for most of its centennial has been in grain commodity production, but the recession hit and Dad died at the same time, and Clay decided to go a different direction, wanted to get into more value-added and diversified production, and after some trial and error hit upon oil as the way to go. So they're doing cold-pressed, unrefined, non-GMO artisanal cooking oil, and started out sort of at the farmers market local level, and then through the value-added producer grant that they secured, they were able to build the business from there and were able to pay workers and and operators in the plant, and were able to invest in packaging and advertising, such that in a relatively short period of time, from starting I think in late 2012, they are today now marketing their oils in 30 states. And all of the work gets done right there on the farm. Clay, Valerie, a few employees, press and package and ship the oil straight from their farm in Georgia. So that's just one of many examples of how people have used the Value-Added Producer Grant Program to start new farm-related businesses. So next slide, we'll shift gears a little bit and go to something more in the fruit and vegetable area and the food safety area. So starting really in the late 1990s, schools and wholesalers and others started requiring produce folks to have third-party food safety audits, and USDA at that time came up with the Good Agricultural Practices, or GAP, audit program, of which there are several different flavors, but the basic idea is it's a voluntary, user fee, independent audit program, voluntary, of course, that produce industry folks can use to verify that fresh fruits and vegetables are produced and packed and handled and stored according to food safety practices. The audits are based on recommendations of the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, and once you're GAP certified, that can really open up new markets that otherwise might be difficult to access. The certification does not guarantee that the product that comes off of that farm is free from contamination, but rather it verifies that the participant has taken proactive measures to reduce the risk of contamination. It is a user fee based program, as I mentioned. On average, and there's a wide range, but on average it costs about $750 to go through the audit program. But the last bullet point there is really important, that there is now a group GAP program where groups of farmers can go through GAP training and certification together, and that can greatly reduce the cost. And a real hat tip to Good Natured Family Farms out of Kansas City and the Wallace Center, who together with USDA Agricultural Marketing Service came up with the group GAP model, so really call that to your attention in particular. I will also add, I'm going to speak briefly about the 2018 Farm Bill towards the end of the webinar, but I will also add that we are proposing that Congress adopt a new GAP audit cost share program in the new Farm Bill. So can't guarantee that will happen, but we are working on a program where farmers could get cost share to do the GAP audit system. So that's a little bit on that, and now we'll go to the next slide, which will take us into the risk management area. Again, the three different choices that lead you to different pages in the guide, but I'll go to the whole farm diversified operation example in my example here today, and that is the next slide, the whole farm revenue protection program. This is a program that NSAC helped lead the charge on and develop and got Congress to approve as part of the 2014 Farm Bill. It's up and running now for 3 years, on the farm and in the field. To date, not quite 3,000 farmers have taken out whole farm policies. We hope to see that grow over time. It is unique in several ways. One is that it is the entire farm and all the revenue streams on that farm, including both crops and livestock, that's being insured. It's the only thing that is like that, where you're insuring multiple enterprises on the farm all in one policy. And then it's also unique in that it is the only crop insurance policy that is offered in every county and every state. So no matter where you are, this is potentially relevant to you. The premium subsidy is 80%. In other words, 80% paid by the government, 20% by the farmer, and there's a diversification. And to get that 80% level, you have to have at least 2 crops. But there's also a diversification bonus that goes up in stair steps until you get to 7 commodities. So it's also the only crop insurance policy that specifically rewards diversification on the farm, which we happen to think is a great risk management technique. So we're glad to see that. And there's a variety of coverage levels the farmer can choose from. Another kind of unusual aspect of it is that the revenue stream that you're protecting against can include the costs of activities that are necessary in order to get the crop to market. There's some restrictions on that, but broadly speaking, those are allowed, which can also be advantageous. So again, it's a fairly new program. It is very much dependent, as is all of crop insurance, on crop insurance agents being out there in the countryside, being willing to sell the product. And that's probably the biggest thing holding the program back at this point. There are certain areas of the country where agents have been aggressive and sign-up is going well, and other areas where they're just not quite familiar with it yet. So we're hoping that over time more and more agents become familiar with it, and therefore it will be more a part of their normal portfolio of insurance products as they talk with farmers. So that's a little bit about Whole Farm, and we'll go to the next slide, and this will bring us into the operating expense part of the guide. Again, with the 3 choices, I'll go to the farm storage as the example of a program that might be of interest to some of you for this. So the next slide gets to the farm storage facility loan program. Farm storage facility loans have been around for a while. It's almost a 20-year-old program, but for most of those years, the primary thing that it financed were grain bins and grain storage, and to a lesser extent, potato storage. Those were the primary uses for it. But in recent years, in part because of an NSAC initiative, where we worked with FSA to try to expand the relevance of the program to other kinds of farmers. It's now being used by fruit and vegetable growers and dairy and meat and a variety of other things beyond the grain bin program that it started out as. So this could be an attractive option for people. It is a low interest financing. You're basically getting the rate that the government can borrow at, so it's well below market rate. The loans can be up to $500,000. The loan term, it depends on the size of the loan, what the term is, but it ranges from 7 years to 12 years in terms of the repayment. There is a down payment requirement, 15% for most of the farm storage facility loans, but 5% if the loan is for $50,000 or less. And it can cover packing sheds and walk-in coolers, and just recently, last year, it's now been extended to mobile refrigeration, which could be really valuable to people doing local meat activities where refrigeration can be absolutely critical. So again, a lot more that could be said about this program, but one that I would call to everybody's attention that it's there, and it's about the most attractive financing you could find for those kinds of activities. So let's move on to land, which is often the toughest nut to crack. But let's say that you're wanting to buy farm real estate to either begin farming or expand your current operation. Again, there are different USDA programs of relevance. If we move to the next slide, I will use the down payment program as an example here of a program that could be attractive, run by the Farm Service Agency, as are most of the farm loan and credit programs at USDA. And this one's especially for beginning farmers and minority farmers. And it's somewhat unusual. It's not your typical FSA 100% government loan. This is more of a partnership. So there's a 5% down payment requirement on the part of the farmer. The government has 45% of the overall loan, and then a commercial or private lender has 50% of the loan. So you need here to be working not only with FSA but also with a local lender to put together the package. But the thing that makes it so attractive is that the FSA portion is a 20-year repayment, and the interest rate is 4% below what FSA would otherwise charge for a real estate loan, which is already below market rate. So this is way, way below market, especially when interest rates are high. So it's not as a huge a gap right now, but especially when interest rates are higher, it becomes a highly attractive offer. It can't go below 1.5%. So for quite a while, it's been at exactly 1.5% interest, but that changes month to month depending on what overall government interest rates are. The FSA portion can finance up to $667,000 worth of real estate. That does not limit the total package, but it limits the FSA portion of it. And the commercial lender, whether that's a community bank or a farm credit system or even a farmer who's willing to do a land contract deal, can get a 95% government guarantee on their portion of the loan. So when you package all that together, it can become quite an attractive option. And in recent years, the last 2 years now, probably the same will be true for this year we're going into, there has been more than enough money appropriated by Congress for this so that they haven't run out. In earlier years, 7 or 8 years ago, you may have tried to get into this program and they had run out of money and you had to wait to the following year, which makes it really difficult to do a real estate deal when the loan window at FSA is shut down. But that has not been a problem recently, and we don't think it will be a problem for the next bunch of years. They should have more than enough money to do this program, so that makes it attractive. And the next slide, I'll just give two examples of recent uses of the program. One picture on the left is Minnesota, two young farmers who had not grown up on farms, so they were new to farming, starting a diversified community-supported agriculture farm, bought their first bit of farmland through the down payment loan program, and because of the relatively modest down payment, they were able to make it work and have been able to pay back on a regular schedule through the CSA proceeds. Example on the left in Nebraska, an example of children beginning to take over portion of their family's farm. In this particular example, it's a 400-acre diversified crop and livestock farm that's doing pastured hogs and pastured chickens and using direct markets in Nebraska for most of their sales. So two examples of which there are many more. There's been 10,000 down payment loans since the program got introduced back in 1994. And again, this is an example of a program that NSAC originated and advocated and got Congress to approve. So we've been tracking it ever since it was legislated back in 1992. So if we go to the next slide, I will just say we've walked through our five, an example of each of our 5 areas in the guidebook, but there are obviously many other programs that could be of relevance. Conservation programs like EQIP, which I've mentioned, or the Conservation Reserve Program, or various organic farming programs. Perhaps the most pertinent direct farmer program is the Organic Certification Cost Share Program. In the crop insurance area, there's the FSA program, the NAP, or the Non-Insured Assistance Program. Even research programs, particularly SARE, the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program, which has a component that's directly for farmers to do on-farm research, or farmers and researchers together to do on-farm research. So those can be of interest within the direct lending programs at Farm Service Agency, in addition to regular direct farm ownership and operating loans and the farm storage facility loans that I talked about. They also have a special category of operating loans called microloans that are $50,000 and less, that are easier to apply for and are particularly important for those doing that need less money to do what they need to finance. And then there's a range of energy programs. The one that directly is applicable to farmers is the Rural Energy for America program, or REAP, where you can get both loans or grants to do renewable energy work on the farm. So, and that's not all of them, obviously, but those are some of them. I'm not going to go into any of those in detail, but I just wanted to flag it for your attention. So the next slide is particularly relevant for today because the proposed administration budget for 2018 just came out literally 2 hours ago. And it is the Trump administration's proposals for what they would like Congress to do in terms of the budget. It's just that, a proposal. Congress makes the real decisions, and that won't happen until much later this year. But I just wanted to flag this because I knew it was happening the same day the webinar was taking place. And I will note that amongst the programs I've talked about, they do propose to eliminate the Value-Added Producer Grant Program, which we will fight back against strongly. And I have a feeling that Congress will be on our side on it and that we'll be able to retain it. But the new administration has proposed getting rid of that program. In fact, not just Value-Added Producer Grant Program, but all the farm and rural business and all the farm co-op programs they propose to eliminate in their entirety. So that will be much debated in Congress, and hopefully they'll reject some of that. At least that's our position. The SARE program I mentioned briefly because they do have those farmer grants for on-farm research. But the President's budget proposal calls for a 30% reduction in funding there. And then one program I haven't mentioned, but I bet people on the phone have used, is the ATTRA program, or the Sustainable Agriculture Information Service, which is both a website and an 800 number where you can get just about any production or marketing question you might have answered. And that is run by USDA under cooperative agreement with the National Center for Appropriate Technology. And in that program also the President's budget calls for eliminating, and we will also be pushing back against that idea since it's been very advantageous. So let me finish up just before we get to Q&A and mention the other obvious thing about 2018. If you go to the next slide, it is a Farm Bill year, and Congress has already started talking about the Farm Bill. It's a broad, comprehensive, omnibus piece of legislation that happens roughly every 5 years. And many of the programs we talked about appear there. So if you go down to Title V on the slide under credit, that's where, for instance, the down payment loan program will get authorized and reauthorized and funded. Or the Title VI, rural development, is where value-added producer grants live, or Title VII, the research title, is where the SARE program and many other research programs live in terms of the statute, or the energy title, Title IX, which is where REAP is, or Title X, which is where organic cost share resides, crop insurance, Title XI, where whole farm revenue protection resides, and so on and so forth. So it is important in terms of the authority for some of the programs that I've been talking about today. Each farm bill has a slightly different makeup, so it won't be for sure exactly these titles in exactly this order necessarily, but it usually is pretty close to the one that came before. Sometimes something gets added, sometimes something gets subtracted, but it generally follows the same framework. So Congress will be debating that. They're already debating it, but they'll be acting on it next year. So if you go to the next slide, I just want to make one point on this pie chart slide. So this is just how the 2014 Farm Bill spending got divvied up, and it's the big green slice is the nutrition title, primarily the SNAP or food stamp program. But if you look at the smaller pie slices, you've got the commodity programs, crop insurance programs, and the conservation programs. Those are the bigger slices of the pie. The point I want to make is that other one that just says other 1% is where a lot of programs that are of particular interest to us reside. So things like the Value-Added Producer Grant Program and the National Organic Certification Cost Share Program, and other programs that I haven't mentioned today because they're not directly farmer programs, but things like the Farmers Market and Local Food Promotion Program and the Organic Research and Extension Initiative and many others are all in that. It's only 1% of the Farm Bill, but it's everything for many of the local and regional food system, beginning farmer, types of programs. So that's very important, and we'll be using a lot of our effort both on the conservation slice and on the other slice, which covers a lot of areas, even though it's a small slice of the total pie. So that leads me, if you go to the next slide, it leads me to say that if you are not already on our action list, you can go to our website, which again is sustainableagriculture.net, and sign up to be, you can sign up for our blogs, you can sign up for our weekly newsletter, and you can sign up to be on the Action Alert system. And that those alerts will cover things like budget and appropriations, but also cover things like Farm Bill action as things heat up next year. We're cautiously optimistic Congress will actually start and finish the 2018 Farm Bill in 2018. It didn't work out that way last time. 2012 became 2013, became 2014 by the time the thing was done. But we're going to go into it with some optimism, despite the fact that the budget that was released by the president today called for major cuts in the farm safety net and even more huge cuts in the nutrition title of the Farm Bill. I don't think Congress will go along with those proposals necessarily. But it certainly has put a damper on spirits as of today on the 2018 Farm Bill to know that the administration is sort of zeroing in on big cutbacks in farm programs and in Farm Bill nutrition programs, including the SNAP program. So we'll see if that has an impact or it doesn't have an impact. Many times Congress ignores what the administration proposes, and that may or may not be the case this time. So stay tuned, but the important reason I put this slide here is to encourage you to sign up for our action system. So the final slide, if you move to the next one, is just how to get us. Again, the website, sustainableagriculture.net, and you see the Twitter and Facebook, and my contact information is there as well if you have a follow-up question. So that's it on my end, and I'll turn it back over to Larissa to handle the questions.
Yeah, thank you, Ferd. That was really fantastic presentation, and the examples you gave were very, very helpful. So I think right now we're ready to take any questions that our audience members may have. You should see a green question mark at the top of your screen. And that's how you submit a question. I've seen a couple come in so far. So I will read them aloud, and then Ferd will be able to respond. So please ask away. So the first question we have is, if we want to talk to someone more about these options that were presented, is there someone we can call? And Ferd, who would you take those calls, or would you refer them to someone else?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would suggest is look at the guide, and the guide will have both links to USDA fact sheets and other information about the program, but once you go to the USDA site, you should be able to get a live person there and a telephone number as well to ask questions. But feel free also to call NSAC, and your call will be directed to whoever on our staff is the resident expert on those programs. We can usually answer many of the questions. If they get super detailed, we usually have to then refer them on to the appropriate person at USDA, but we're happy to take a crack at it. But I would look through the guide first and make sure many times the basic information there or the fact sheets that they're linked to might answer your question.
Thank you for that. We have a couple questions about more specific situations. Again, if we need to answer some of these offline, that's fine. But one person would like to know, are there grants available to buy acres with pine trees that border on one side for a buffer? So I think these are specific questions to specific farms. So I don't know if you want to take that one, Ferd, or answer it offline, but.
Yeah, so if you're talking about buffer strips, whether they're grass or trees along waterways or they're field border buffers or any conservation-related kind of buffer strip, the continuous sign-up conservation reserve program is probably the best place to look. That, like all CRP contracts, they offer annual rental payments over a 10-year basis if it's grass, or 15 years if it's trees. The great thing about the continuous sign-up is, like its name implies, if you're eligible, you can sign up at any time for that program, unlike regular conservation reserve program where you're enrolling an entire farm. Those are only available periodically when USDA offers a particular sign-up for that. But the continuous sign-up, which includes all the buffer practices, you can sign up for any time. They currently, right at this very moment, are not open for business for the rest of 2017, but you can go in to sign up to begin in 2018 now. So that's probably the best option. Both the Conservation Stewardship Program and the Environmental Quality Incentives Program also have financial assistance for buffers, but they don't offer the rental payments like the CRP does. So I would say the continuous sign-up CRP is probably the best bet. If you have an existing buffer but want to enlarge it, probably the Conservation Stewardship Program is the best place to look, because there are particular CSP enhancements that are specifically for enlarging current buffers.
Thank you. Next question, also about grants. What are the best grants for non-organic cattle and hog farmers? Any insight into that? I know it kind of depends on what they would be for.
Yeah. I mean, if it potentially, depending on specifically what it was for, a value-added producer grant might be possible, and otherwise, otherwise, if it wasn't eligible for value added, then there's probably no other grant program, but there are all the FSA loan programs. So if it's financing for a livestock operation, the direct ownership or the direct operating loans or the guaranteed operating loans at FSA would be the place to go to look for financing. But for grants, probably the only thing would be value-added producer grants if it qualifies as value-added. Or if you're doing research, then potentially the SARE producer grants if it was a research question. So that would also be another potential grant, but specifically if it was for research. I think that's about all I can think of, at least off the top of my head.
Thank you, Ferd. Any other questions out there? I have one, Ferd, that I know you mentioned briefly. Since we have so many livestock farmers on, I know you said during the 2018 Farm Bill within CSP, the grazing supplement that you all or NSAC is working on. Could you talk a little bit more about that option that I know is not quite an option yet, but might be on the table?
Yeah, happy to. So Congress, when they first established CSP, put in a supplemental payment for resource conserving crop rotations, and there's a whole definition of what qualifies under that, but basically diversified crop rotations that are addressing soil health and water quality issues, and that's really nice because it's a payment over and above the whatever else your payment rate would be under CSP. So it's specific to that particular practice, which encourages diversification and reduced input use. So we're really keen on that, but we've always felt like there should also be something like that for, that's obviously for crop farmers. There should be something for livestock producers. And so what we're asking Congress to do is to say that there will be a supplemental payment for crop rotation, but also for management-intensive rotational grazing. And so far, we've walked that around a bit in Congress, and the reaction has been pretty favorable so far. So hoping we can get that into the 2018 Farm Bill. And if so, then you can basically say, as a normal rule of thumb, whenever a bill passes in Congress, it's usually close to a year before it actually is available on the ground. So, if everything went well in 2019, that might be available.
Excellent. I know that would probably be of interest to a lot of farmers on this call. And we have one last question that's come up before we end. Actually, all right, last two questions. Another one about grants. Chicken farmers wondering if there are any grants for building organic chicken houses.
No, I don't think so. Again, I will qualify all these answers with, I don't know absolutely everything that USDA has to offer, but not that I'm aware of. Again, loans and financing, yes, but grants, not that I can think of, again, unless it was a research question, and then the SARE research grants might work. But I would also say, as a general rule, other than loan programs, government grant programs, most of them, not all of them, but most of them don't allow for structures or bricks and mortar, as they call it. There are exceptions to that rule, but generally grant programs are not covering buildings or structures. So sorry about that, but that's I think the state of
the reality. And then the last question we have is a farmer is wondering about money to rehabilitate a power line that has been sprayed to raise hogs. Is there such funding available for that or financing? These are more specific.
I will have to say I don't know, but I don't know. I don't know whether the Rural Utility Service would potentially have something. It's beyond my area of expertise, so I don't want to give you wrong information, but I guess I would start with the Rural Utility Service and see if there's anything they could do to help.
That's good advice. Okay, well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I just have a couple housekeeping items before we sign off. I know people are wondering, a recording of this webinar will be available very soon. It's going to be archived on our website, and I will also email it to you all, along with a lot of the links and resources that Ferd referred to throughout the presentation, including the guide. And just don't forget that we have one more webinar coming up on June 5th. This one is about business strategies to enhance your CSA. So it's designed to help you improve your farm's community supported agriculture program, if you have one or if you're thinking about starting one. So if you join us, you'll learn innovative approaches that can make your program better for your customers, of course, and then also more profitable for you as a farmer. And we have presenters that will be from the USDA and from the University of Kentucky, and they're going to talk about some of the new services and amenities that CSA programs around the country are adding to better accommodate customer desires for, say, broader product selection, product availability, and then more flexible subscription and payment terms. So if this is of interest to you, please join us. As always, it's free and you can easily register online. Also, immediately after this webinar ends, you will be asked to complete a very short survey about your experience. So if you wouldn't mind taking a minute or two, I would truly value any input or feedback that you could share with us. And finally, I'd love once again like to offer a very sincere thank you to Ferd for such an excellent presentation and for taking the time to be with us today and answer all of our questions. Thank you to our audience members for your attention and interest. It's certainly been my pleasure to host. And Ferd, is there any last things that you'd like to add before we sign off?
Well, I think that's it. I just encourage everybody to take a look at the guide, and I'd love feedback on it. I guess that's what I would add if you have any suggestions, because we'll undoubtedly do future editions of it, and we want to make it as useful to farmers or would-be farmers as we possibly can. So I'd encourage you to look at it, and if you have feedbacks, please send it my way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ferd, and thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon, and hopefully we'll all keep in touch. Bye-bye.